Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Henry Gunter, and I am with the South Carolina Department of Education's Office of General Counsel. I'm going to be speaking with you today about a regulatory requirement and how to ensure that you comply with that regulatory requirement regarding the funds that your district has received under ESSER, which I'm sure at this point we all know means the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. First, a little bit of background about federal regulations. Now, we have talked about this in previous contexts that there is no such thing as free money. When the federal government gives out money, there are generally going to be strings attached. Now, those strings can be in the form of assurances, but also the strings could just be federal regulations themselves. So all of your subgrant funds, including ESSER funds, are subject to federal regulations. Some or all of the U.S. Department of Education's EDGAR, which are their general administrative requirements, are going to apply to the ESSER subgrants. In terms of which regulations are going to apply, where you're going to want to look is your sub-award notification document. That is going to specify exactly which of these regulations are going to apply. So 2 CFR Part 200 is generally known as the UGG, or Uniform Grant Guidance. What 2 CFR 200 is this set of cross-cutting regulations that apply to all federal education grants and subgrants. Um, they're generally going to be known as well as uniform guidance or uniform grant guidance, and they are really the best place to start in terms of understanding these applicable regulations. Specifically, for purposes of this technical assistance, I want to zero in on one particular section of the UGG, and that's going to be number 7 under item B in section 302 of the Uniform Guidance. So what the specific language of that is going to provide is it's providing relevant guidance about the financial management system that a grantee or a subgrantee needs to have in order to manage federal funds. Number 7, which is the last in a list under item B, states that your school district must have written procedures for determining the allowability of cost in accordance with subpart E of this part, which is the cost principles and the uniform guidance. Also, the terms and conditions of the federal award are going to be relevant. For our purposes in this presentation, the federal award in question is going to be your ESSER subgrant. So let's take a little bit of a deep dive into some of these terms and try to get a closer idea of exactly what this language means. So the first term we're going to want to take a look at is written procedures. Anytime written procedures are mentioned in a federal regulation, it means that you need to have a process that you follow, and that process needs to be written or documented. These should be processes that others in your district also follow, so they should be communicated to all relevant parties as a standard operating procedure. The mention of written procedures is a pretty good clue as well that it is ripe for review by either program monitors or auditors. These are, we call them low-hanging fruit for auditors because they are an easy thing for an auditor to ask for, but just as easily, they are hopefully going to be an easy thing for you to point the auditor to. So let's look at the next term. Allowability of cost. What does allowability of cost mean? In order to define that, we're going to want to look at subpart E of the UGG, and that is going to be cost principles. Early in the cost principles under basic considerations are a few sections that are going to provide some pretty good guidance about what is going to make a cost allowable. I would strongly encourage each and every one of you to review these sections because they give the criteria for what makes a cost reasonable and allowable. Just to mention these ones here on the slide, 200.403 pertains to factors affecting allowability of cost, and you see that language being necessary and reasonable. So reasonableness is definitely one of the buzzwords surrounding the issue. Move to the next section and you see again reasonable cost, and you're going to get a little bit of a definition there, and that if in its nature and amount it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances prevailing at the time. This is kind of taking the reasonable person standard that we see in other areas of the law and applying it to those costs. And finally, in 200.405, we are going to see a good bit of guidance regarding allocable costs. So we have now defined written procedures and allowability of costs. So let's look back to the language of 200.302b7. And so we've talked about the first half of it. So let's look at what is meant by and terms and conditions of the federal award. The terms and conditions of your federal subgrant award are going to be conveyed in that subaward notification that you receive. Where you're going to look specifically is the scope of work section as well as the applicable regulation sections. Language in the scope of work can indicate specific uses of funds and restrictions on using those funds for only certain things. The applicable regulation section is going to indicate the laws and regulations that apply to the award and is always going to include our agency's assurances and terms and conditions. Also, another thing to be mindful of is with these ESSER funds, we previously addressed this in another training, that there are program-specific assurances that are going to apply to your award. So now that we have looked at the specific language of that regulation, let's take a look at how this is going to apply to your ESSER subgrants, because those are the federal awards in question. In May of 2021, the U.S. Department of Education issued guidance through an FAQ document on both the ESSER programs and the GEAR programs. I would encourage y'all to review this document and keep it handy as you manage your ESSER subgrants, because the USED addresses how you can use those funds, and they included specific questions you should ask when weighing or analyzing what costs are allowable. So in the guidance document, the U.S. Department of Education kind of sets the stage by opening the first section, which is the overview, with a reference to allowable uses of funds and what an LEA must determine. From there, they're going to follow it with 4 specific questions. The first 2 are, is the use of funds intended to prevent, prepare for, or respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, including its impact on the social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs of students? Second question is, does the use of funds fall under one of the authorized uses of ESSER or GEAR funds? The third question is the use of funds permissible under the Uniform Administrative Requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards found in 2 CFR Part 200? And the fourth and final question is, in particular, is it, the use of funds, necessary and reasonable for the performance of the ESSER or GEAR award? A little tip for everybody. When the federal government provides guidance, use it. I think there are a lot of instances where we have justifiably grumbled or complained about a lack of guidance from the federal government. And so, where they are actually providing guidance, I think it is heavily advisable to utilize that to the greatest degree possible. Also, just keep in mind that you're going to want to develop a version of written procedures for determining the allowability specific to those ESSER funds. Okay, so we have addressed now which parts of the regulations apply to the subaward that you have received. So now you're asking, the regulations require it, but how do I write these procedures? So first thing you want to keep in mind, and I love the cartoon there with the Flintstone style wheel, is that first things first, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You have a great starting point with your district's current written procedures for determining the allowability of cost. Remember that the regulation that we have looked at applies to all federal subawards, so your district should already have a written procedure that you can build upon. Then you're going to want to incorporate those specific questions that the U.S. Department of Education provides in the overview section of the FAQ document that pertains to those ESSER and GEER funds. As an example of a written procedure specific to ESSER funds, we are sharing ours. We're sharing our written procedure. Note that it references specific resources that our agency provides for our staff. However, your district can use it as a guide in crafting your own ESSER-specific written procedures. You can download a copy of our procedure from the file box below this screen. I'm not sure how all the tech nooks and crannies work, but it should be available right there. You can also access the files I've referenced by clicking the hyperlinks in the notes box for this presentation. Now, a few final reminders for y'all. Your district's written procedures should reflect how your district operates, including the resources you provide to your staff. Be sure to modify the example document. You should use it as a guide instead of just replacing references to the SCDE with your district's name. You want to reflect the unique circumstances, unique properties, unique needs of your district. You want to make sure that it is going to stand up for scrutiny of a monitor or auditor. Excuse me, auditor. Thank you all for watching this training. Be sure to utilize our ESSER web pages. Also, you can email us at scesser@ed.sc.gov if you have any questions. Appreciate everybody and everything you do. Have a great day, and we look forward to working with you on this.